Hey people, it's been a little while since I've made a video. I had every intention of doing this yesterday, and I actually attempted to do it at 11 o'clock last night, but I was pretty exhausted, and my attempt was not was not of the highest quality. So we're going to try again. Yesterday was Memorial Day, and once we get into my topic a little bit, you'll understand why I was kind of set on getting it done yesterday, but it really didn't work out as planned. So anyway, today's Tuesday, and it's been a while since I've made a YouTube video because I have been working on a bunch of other important stuff. Fighting City Hall, as they say. I've been really fighting hard for to get masks off kids in school in my little corner of the world over here in New Jersey. I really do feel like we've got to fight these things at a grassroots level. So even though I don't have kids, I have been getting very much involved in the local school board. I gotta say, I'm really, really passionate about it. But all the more reason why I need to talk about this very important topic. One, because yesterday was Memorial Day, and Memorial Day is a day to honor those that have made the ultimate sacrifice, fighting for our freedoms and our rights, and, you know, that our children have the ability to go to school, and that we have, you know, an economy, and we're able to live life and have liberty and own property and, you know, love our neighbors and our family and all that good stuff. You know, there's a long line of people that have died in order for us to be able to enjoy those things. So yesterday was a day to remember those folks. And yesterday was a beautiful day, so I spent most of it outside. But I was thinking about when I was going to get a chance to make this video. So now's the time. And as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about the history of our country, these United States of America. When I was in school, I really wasn't interested in history. And as I went back and kind of learned all this stuff over again, and I'll give you the disclaimer right now, I am by no means a history buff. There might be some stuff that I say in the next few minutes that is not accurate, and by all means, please let me know. But back when I was, 15, 16, 17, I really didn't have an interest in this stuff. But now that I've gotten so involved in understanding our rights and where they come from and why we are such an amazing group of people, it makes so much more sense now. Having experienced the struggles of the last year, I can't imagine what our forefathers experienced that provoked them to, sail across an ocean, back in the late, 1600s, early 1700s, when there was no such thing as GPS or navigation or, steel-hulled boats or anything like that we have, engines and all that stuff. So you can only imagine the oppression that they were experiencing for them to leave their homeland and start new, because they felt that strongly about their rights. So it is a little bit frustrating having learned this, what I've learned over the last few months, and then dealing with what we're dealing with now. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, I just don't have the time. I had a nail appointment. I couldn't make it to that meeting. Wah, wah, wah. Honestly, people literally starve to death, to start this country off. And that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about right now. And I'm going to try and make this relatively quick. But the one thing that is super important to me is having an accurate history. And what I've realized is, I'll search a few things on the computer or whatever. And actually I just put in a search quick for, the shot heard around the world. And based on what the history I'm learning, that was the kind of the shot that started the Revolutionary War. It was, Battle of Lexington and Concord. But when you type that into a search engine, you get all different kinds of stuff, like 1951 baseball game or something. Point being that when the only history that we're able to find is digital history, when it's something you search on a computer, it only takes a webmaster 2 seconds to update something and literally change history. So if the only record that we have of something is electronic, it can be changed in an instant. So, what is the truth? If there is no static record of something, we can perpetually be changing history. And what I've learned, because you guys know I have a fascination with old books, I've got a couple of them piled here. This one has been my go-to. It's The American People and the Nation. This was essentially a textbook for kids in the early 1900s. So I got a lot of my history out of here. And then this is The Great Republic by Master Historians. This one's from the late 1800s, 1888. I've got The Beginnings of New England. This one's pretty cool. Of course, it talks mostly about New England, but this is from $1889, and there's really cool pictures in all of them, and they've got I don't know if you can see that. Can you see the signature? It says Hatch, Scituate. I paid $8 for this. But there's just there's so much history in this, and I love it. It smells old and it feels old and it can never be changed, and it's just so amazing. The American Commonwealth. I paid $5 for this, and there's a little inscription on the inside. 1911. It's just amazing. Anyway, that's not the point of my conversation right now. Right now, I want to tell you about the history of these United States of America, right? So that's what it is. It's these individual states that decided to unite. And how did we get there, right? So it's important that we know this, because in order to understand how important our rights are and why we should be super passionate about it, we have to understand the oppression that our ancestors went through in order to get to where we are now, so that we can appreciate all of the rights and freedoms that we have. So 1600s, right, in England, ruled by a king, ruled by a tyrannical king, that you couldn't keep a job. You weren't able to get a meaningful wage from the work that you did. You weren't able to practice your own religion. You had to practice, the Church of England, whatever religion that was. I honestly don't know. But you didn't get a trial. If you were accused of doing something wrong, you just got thrown in prison, or down into the dungeon, or there was no due process. You weren't able to own property. It was a very oppressive time, led by a tyrannical king, and there were a small group of people that just couldn't take it anymore, and they were willing to do anything to get out from under the oppression of this king. So they banded together. They collected some money. They had some, folks support them, and they actually were able to convince the king to give them a bit of land over here in the New World. So this small group of folks, they got on a ship and sailed across the ocean, not really quite sure where they were going to end up, but they ended up at Jamestown, which was the original, what we know of as the original settlement of the colonies. So, Jamestown was the first southern colony. And when I say colony, a colony is like a colony is the baby, of the country. So we've got the country of Great Britain, and then we've got a colony, which is still related, still attached to Great Britain, but it's its own, entity, I guess you could say. But Jamestown was still supported by Great Britain, so ships would come over every now and then, and they would bring supplies and more people, and people that were here in the United States, they were struggling. They were dying of starvation and diseases, and life was not easy. But as time went on, they learned how to plant things, and they learned how to hunt and to trap, and I do intend on getting more into the history of the relationships with the Native Americans and all that sort of stuff. I honestly don't know much about that right now, but I do intend to look into it, and I will share it with you when I learn. But my focus was really just the original colonists for right now. So yeah, they came over, they were, starting to establish themselves, and Great Britain started to realize, wow, those folks over there in the New World they're doing all right, and they're starting to produce things, lumber and tobacco and indigo and wheat, and Great Britain saw us as an opportunity to make money. So, as more people came over, our agriculture grew, and, hunting and all these different resources that we were able to find here in the New World became profitable. So Great Britain started to use us as a cash cow. Basically, they would export all of our goods that we produce. They would export them through England and then, disperse them so they would make money there. And they would also make money on anything that imported. So basically anything that came into or out of the New World had to go through England. So England was making quite a bit of money off of us. And as more people came over, the settlement started to spread out. So we've got the original settlement down in Jamestown, and then we've got another settlement up near, Plymouth, Massachusetts. And folks were coming over for all the reasons that I mentioned previously. They wanted to practice their own religion. They wanted to own land. They wanted to, work and make a meaningful living. Life, liberty, and property were very important to them. So, now we've essentially got two different settlements, you could say, colonies, still dependent on England. Everything was coming through England, and England was basically in control of all of the ports and all of the commerce that was going on. So we were crafty people. We started looking at ways to get around the oppression of England, because that was the one thing that we were trying to get away from. So things started to be smuggled in here, there, and everywhere. Other ports were being set up, and ships were coming in, and just to kind of get under the radar of the Englishmen. But England, quickly caught on to that, and they brought in more troops into the United States, or at this point, America, the New World, whatever you want to call it. So now we've got, 10,000 British troops here in the States, and we've got, British ships off our coast, and we're really feeling the oppression again now in the New World. British folks, I guess the Parliament, you could say, they put into place something called writs of assistance, because they knew that all this smuggling was going on, and they couldn't find a way to control it. So they put something in place called the writ of assistance, and any one of these British soldiers that was here in the New World, they had the authority to enlist the help of anybody on the street for the purposes of collecting taxes. So they would basically see somebody walking down the street, and they would say, hey, you come over here, I need your help. Writ of assistance, you need to help me go pillage this house, because I know that they have smuggled goods in there. So, anybody could get pulled off the street, and they would have to go pillage, their friend or their neighbor's house. And surely, the colonists did not look highly upon this. So we started to push back. The colonists were beginning to push back on, the oppression that was leaking over into America. And King George at the time, 1760s or so, they were trying to find ways to contain us and control us. So there were lots of laws about navigation. We had the standing army, and they put something into place called the Stamp Act, which really kind of upset everybody. So the Stamp Act was in place. Basically, they would put a stamp for taxation. You had to buy the stamp and then put it on things like documents, letters, newspapers, and it was a form of a tax. So you had to buy the stamp in order for these different types of paper articles to be allowed, into commerce and that sort of thing. So the Stamp Act was really, I think, it seems to me, the turning point. Everyone, once that happened, things really changed a bit. And the colonists decided that something had to happen. So they slowly but surely started to organize. And they pushed back so much that they were able to repeal the Stamp Act. But it didn't take long before the Townsend Act came into place. So the Stamp Act went away and the Townsend Act came in. And the Townsend Act put a tax on things like glass. I'm looking at my notes here. There were glass, tea, and paper. And the purpose of the Townsend Act was to pay for the governor and the judge's salaries, right? So if you've got a governor and a judge whose salaries are dependent on the tax, they're of course going to make sure that the taxes are enforced. But we didn't like that idea. So the colonists started boycotting things like paper, glass, and tea. And if, there's one thing that we do remember about our history class back in high school, it was the Boston Tea Party, right? So England would import all this tea over to the United States and they would just expect us to buy it. But we decided, you know what? We ain't going to drink your stinking tea. And we either sent the ships back to England in some instances, or, we just let them sit at the dock in the harbor, in places like Philadelphia and New York. But in Boston, we took it a little further. We dumped all the tea into the harbor. Big money back then. All that tea was worth a lot of money. And England did not like that. So, of course, they sent more troops over. Tensions were starting to get really high. The colonists were realizing that we needed to organize ourselves a little better in an offensive way, so we set up our own militia. The Minutemen became a thing. Just the average man at this point, with a gun that could get together and be on a moment's notice, in a minute's notice, ready to fight the standing British army that was ever increasing in Boston. So, tensions got really high, and at this point, Britain had closed off the harbor completely to Boston, and the town of Boston itself was really starting to suffer because they weren't getting any imports, the things that they needed to sustain the people in that area. So rather than let them suffer, the folks from down south, they helped out as best they could, and they started sending things up, like rice and there's a story that some sheep were brought up, and from Connecticut, and all these different things were brought into Boston, or in order to avoid the blockades and such that the British had set up. And that kind of mutual assistance is what brought kind of the North and the South together for the common goal of beating, the British, and to once and for all do away with this oppression. So that's when the idea of separating completely from Britain came about. And as time went on, we had the first Continental Congress where everyone got together and started to say, like, what are we going to do? Like, what kind of government are we going to set up? Are we really going to do this? Are we really going to, break off completely from our motherland and be a free and independent group of states? And, so we had the first Continental Congress and the second Continental Congress, and Thomas Paine wrote his Common Sense paper, which was enough to drum up excitement for the idea of separating. And then I guess I think 1775 was what I mentioned earlier, the shot heard around the world when, the initial shot of the revolution started, between Lexington and Concord. And shortly thereafter was the Battle of Bunker Hill. And, just average men, these Minutemen took up arms and clashed with British soldiers because they were done being oppressed, and they were done with, the endless oppression. It's just a good word to describe it. And, 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence. We were fed up and we just wouldn't take it anymore. And, if you go back and read the Declaration of Independence, it line by line talks about, the different types of oppression that we were experiencing. And to be honest, it's not all that different than some of the stuff that's going on today. We may not have a literal standing army of soldiers, outside our house, but it does feel pretty oppressive, and it does feel like we are being watched in one way, shape, or form. And some things we're okay with. Hey, so what if YouTube is keeping tabs on the videos that I'm making and all that stuff? But really, it's not all that different than having a standing army. They might not be in my face with a gun, but there's definitely a feeling of censorship and oppression, and a lot of our freedoms are being taken away. And it's hard to imagine that it's kind of just passively happening when we think back to our forefathers and how much they fought for the freedoms that we have now, and how easily we're letting them slip away. So that kind of sums up history of these United States of America, all individual states that decided to unite to free themselves from the oppression of a tyrannical parliamentary government of Great Britain. These United States, we the people, it hasn't been all that long, but we've forgotten. We've really, really forgotten, and it's time to remember. So hopefully this was a bit of a refresher. For me, honestly, it was stuff I never really knew. I mean, I know I've heard it before, but I didn't really know it. I didn't really understand it. And I'm starting to get it, so I figured I would share it with you guys. I hope you found this interesting, and I will continue to share the more I learn. But until then, have a good night, and I will see you next time.